Good morning. Well, I'm glad to see most of you have made it. I think we probably have a few sleepy heads that are struggling to get out of bed this morning after all the fun that was had last night at the casino night. I counted up all the money that was donated, and we collected $1,263 to donate to Hurricane Harvey relief. So I think that's a good number, and every little helps, of course. So hopefully we can somehow I can come back to you and let you know exactly how it helped. I don't know if they'll be able to do that for me, but I'll definitely try. And we had 3 winners from the casino night last night. It was Derek from Coke Fertilizer, Melissa from Knoxguard, and Jeff from PPC Lubricants. So at some point before you go today, please come by registration and we'll give you your prizes. Feedback forms are on your desk. You guys know how I feel about feedback, how important this is to me. So please do take a moment and fill out the feedback forms. Let us know what you think. Let us know how you feel about the last 3 days. We really want to hear from you. And we have a town hall forum roundtable discussion that we're going to do later today. I've got a little bowl at the registration desk. If you want to submit any questions anonymously, just write it on a piece of paper, fold it up, and put it in that bowl. And we'll make sure that Adam puts those questions to the floor today so that you guys can hopefully have a really productive discussion. Last order of business is that the presentations are all online, even today's. So if you have your login details, my colleague Diletta, I've asked her to send you another email reminding you of what your login details are, just in case, just so it's at the top of your emails. But you can even download them now and log in and follow along on your laptops or on your phones as the day goes on. So that's it for me. I'll pass over to Tim. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of this DEF forum. As we explained yesterday, we've certainly looked at the program, and we've made sure that every presentation counts. So there's going to be some really interesting content during the course of this morning. We're very glad to have each of the speakers that have joined us to present their perspective on the particular angle they bring to the DEF discussion in terms of the market developments and some of the challenges and issues that face using SCR equipment and the kind of customer experiences we see in the market. So it's a slightly different focus to yesterday. Yesterday we had a rather technical discussion about quality. Thank you. Quality just before lunch, and early on some of the market outlook issues which were discussed. So I hope you see a good coverage of the topics we are tackling during the course of the 2 days. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off then. One of our old friends in the industry and long-time contacts has joined us. We're very, very honored to have Dan Kieffer here, who is Director of Emissions Compliance at PACCAR, deeply involved for some time in terms of the issues affecting the implementation of emissions control technologies of all kinds. He's involved in government discussions and regulatory discussions across the country in all the jurisdictions, and of course has to work very closely with internal stakeholders and customers. So he really does bring a lot of breadth of experience to us. His official title is Director of Emissions Compliance, responsible for North American engine and vehicle emissions-related certification and compliance work. But over the years, he's worked in engineering, manufacturing, marketing, program management roles. And so we're very glad to have Dan give us the perspective from PACCAR as a truck manufacturer, one of the leading truck manufacturers. And he's going to be talking to us about the experience that PACCAR have had in DEF in the heavy-duty sector. He's delved into some of the numbers and brought some insights to share with us today about how things have run since 2010 as DEF and SCR has been implemented, and then looking ahead too at some of the future potential regulation developments that we covered in brief yesterday. So we're looking forward to hearing Dan's experience, opinion from an expertise point of view. So Dan, welcome you to the stage. We've got a very expectant audience waiting to hear, so thanks for agreeing to join us today, and we look forward to hearing from you and your perspectives. Your slides are up. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim. And thank you for the opportunity to be here once again as an old friend. doing a lot of different things in the industry, as Tim said. And you know, my experience, 37 years in the industry, 37 years with PACCAR, takes me back to the good old days when engines were simple and very, very mechanical in nature, and we didn't have to worry about a lot dealing with the emission side of things. But the one thing we know, and I've learned, and I consistently tell those that I work with, is the only thing constant is change. And change is certainly a key aspect of the regulatory world. And for the last 6.5 years, I've dealt with that directly and indirectly for many years ahead of that. In our industry, going back to the beginning as we started looking at the 2010 regulation, the challenge was, how do we develop a system that's going to meet the regulatory needs and our customer needs? How do we get the win-win-win so the environment is included as well? And there are a lot of trade-offs that we had to go through in that. The key focus has always been for the industry, first, is on the customer. If you get the equation right for the customer, then the environment is going to win, and the regulatory front is going to win as well. I think as a general statement, the industry started off at about a 2% dosing rate with the diesel exhaust fluid. You know, and the focus was really, how do we create that balance between how much fluid is used and what the fuel economy is for the customer. You know, and in that decision process, the fuel economy for the customer was the thing that led in the decision-making process. The regulatory requirements that EPA put on us in terms of having 2 times the dosing capability on the vehicle for the fuel capacity was also part of the equation. Over the years, we've increased the dosing rate, and I think generally speaking across the industry, we're probably somewhere in the 4% dosing rate right now. And that's come along as a part of our drive to increase the fuel economy for customers, and certainly with the greenhouse gas regulation, being able to push ourselves to be compliant in that as well. The trade-offs come in the area of engine out NOx versus DEF consumption. And it ties really these days into the NOx versus greenhouse gas trade-off. You know, there's an inverse proportion between the two. And in the engineering world, if we can increase the engine out NOx and get the after-treatment system to work a little harder, we can increase the fuel economy performance and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So that's really where our mind has had to go over the years. There are many challenges for us, and just a few of those are shown on the slide now. All the OEMs install multiple engine brands, and not everybody's philosophy is the same. And trying to create a balance for our customers so that no matter what engine they're buying, the vehicle performs the same. The challenge on dosing rates and DEF tank sizes versus fuel tank, the interaction for the inducement, SCR inducements that EPA mandates in order to make sure that nobody's going to be cheating. You know, they're not going to be running without DEF. They're not going to be running with poor quality DEF, and certainly anybody who tries to tamper with a system, change any sensor, remove a sensor, clip a wire, unplug a wire, they're all penalized. You know, all of that is a part, certainly in the early years, a very key part for EPA agreeing that the SCR technology is one that would be acceptable for the industry. The chassis designs, because of the diversity of product, really early on created some challenges for us. You know, how do you find enough space on the frame to put the diesel exhaust fluid tanks on board, particularly at the 2-to-1 ratio that EPA was requiring. Some customers, depending upon number of axles, configuration, equipment, particularly on straight trucks, that was a real problem for us and for them. Many chassis had to be redesigned. So that was the history. That was a brief look in the past. David did a nice job last night setting up the whole background to it. But now the question is really what's coming in the future. So as we look into our crystal ball, you see it's not a very clear image. You know, it's a little clearer around the edges. We know what's coming more on the short term, but when we look out to the real difficult future, what's coming with the future NOx regulations, it's a very foggy future for us right now. When we look at what we call the future for diesel exhaust fluid, I'd say that today's world, we're from an OEM design standpoint, we're really in a stable environment. You know, there are small tweaks coming, but in terms of the dosing rates and the technology we're using, we really are at a stable point in time. With greenhouse gas phase 2 coming in 2021, I predict that there will be a growth in the use of diesel exhaust fluid. You know, in order to hit the emissions goals that EPA has set forward, and they are rather challenging at this point, I would envision that the dosing rates will have to increase. Engine out NOx will continue to go up, and thus we will need to get our after-treatment systems to be even more efficient than they are today. That means we're going to increase the use of DEF. Now, when we look at ultra-low NOx regulations that California is considering, and everybody's hoping that maybe EPA will come to the table on, we don't know. Absolutely no idea. We have no idea what the technology is that's going to get us there. And as such, then we don't know what the requirement is going to be for DEF. One thing that I would say is, as we look at some of the requirements, we would envision that we're probably going to see some increases there, and I'll talk about the reason for that in the future. With phase 2 of greenhouse gas, it's a 3-step regulation starting in 2021. 2024, 2027 have increased in stringency on all aspects of the regulation. The regulation covers engine performance, just as phase 1 did. Also covers the tractors and vocational applications of vehicles, and at least for the moment, trailers are included in that regulation. We'll see what happens with the petition that's in front of the agencies right now. Well, one of the key things that's unique in phase 2 of greenhouse gas is the fact that the engine is now assessed as a part of the vehicle. In phase 1, the engine was assessed only in a test cell. You run the standard emissions tests and you measure the performance of the greenhouse gas emissions, and you either hit the regulation above or below and use credits or earn some credits. But in phase 2, the engine, transmission, or axle ratio, tires are all now a part of the vehicle assessment, which means that a customer spec comes very clearly under the microscope for the agency. So it's no longer just about how does an engine perform on the federal test protocol or on the supplemental emissions test. It's how does it perform in the vehicle on duty cycles, run at 65 miles an hour with road grade, 55 miles an hour with road grade, and transient cycles. So the real performance changes the equation now that we have to look at. As we continue moving to the future, there are a number of things that we need to consider as an OEM when we decide what we're going to do with diesel exhaust fluid and the engine after-treatment technology. As I said earlier, the DEF dosing and fuel economy relationship is a key to what we're looking at. But the SCR technology and its efficiency level comes into play even more critically in the future. You know, right now, many of the systems are running at 99.5% efficient out there. Not much more efficiency that can be pulled out of that current technology. So we have to become a little smarter in how we use that technology. Tied into that is the requirements from EPA on the fuel to DEF ratio that we must maintain on all vehicle specs. And that then drives for our customer their fuel capacity and the diesel exhaust fluid capacity that are available or can be fit onto a given chassis configuration. Tank sizes then create that frame space and issue for us and or for our customer in their configuration. And then the weight of both fluids are critical in some applications, such as mixers, where every pound is payload. It's a dollar gain or dollar lost in terms of moving freight. And then how does the customer use the vehicle? What's the duty cycle? Are they running just over the road? Those are easy. 99% efficiency, we can make that happen. Those that are running in the city and stop and go, a little more challenging. The after-treatment system doesn't come up to temperature as fast and doesn't stay at that temperature. And that's one of the things that the agencies are looking at in the next step, the next round of NOx regulations. Very diverse market that we play in, particularly when we get into the vocational space. You see a lot of difference in the various applications and the way that customers are using the vehicles. A tractor is not a tractor. Line haul is not line haul. Everybody uses the vehicle different, and dump is not dump. Every state, every region has unique rules, unique configuration requirements that we have to deal with. We should also be aware that there are alternatives out there, alternative technologies that aren't using diesel exhaust fluid. And we talked a little bit about those in the future, or yesterday. But when we look to the future, there are things that are underway that are going to make these alternatives even more prominent in the marketplace. Particularly on the hybrid and electric vehicle, California is in the process of developing a regulation that they're calling their Advanced Clean Local Vehicle program. In that program, starting in 2023, ramping up to 2030, based on what they presented publicly, they will start requiring OEMs who sell into California to sell Class 2B through 7 vehicles at an increasing rate as full electric vehicles. Start off at about 3% of sales, and by 2030 they want 15% of all medium-duty vehicles to be full electric vehicles. And if you think they're going to stop there, you're wrong. They'll continue to push. They're continuing to push on natural gas technologies as well. When we fully implemented the 2010 regulation, I think everybody was fairly confident that we were done. You don't reduce NOx anymore. It's enough. It's green. We're good to go. Now let's focus on CO2. Well, guess we were wrong.
Final rule, remember that?
Yeah, that's
rule.
right. It was called the final rule. It's kind of like ever and never. Try and not use those. Never use ever? Yeah, right. Anyway, we do have more regulation coming when it comes to NOx. Refer to it as an ultra low NOx, since the last regulation was a low NOx regulation. The pie chart shows the knowledge base that exists right now. You know, the green is what we know. Just a small portion of what we're going to need to know in order to ultimately implement a new regulation. The yellow represents what we know we don't know. There's a lot of work going on in testing to understand that. But the red, which is the vast majority of this, is what we don't know we don't know. It's kind of like when the regulation was set for the final rule. There was a technology path that was envisioned, and that is not the technology path that was used. We thought we knew how customers would use it and all the issues that we were going to see, and for those who were the end user of the vehicles, they found that there was a lot that we didn't know. And so we have a ways to go in all of this. So the path forward starts with trying to understand as much as we can today and use that knowledge, leverage it as we move forward. So what is the problem? Why is it a problem? How did it become a problem? Where is it a problem? When does it become a problem? Is it all the time? And who is it that's creating that problem or can influence the solution to that problem? One of those answers comes from the California Air Resources Board. This was part of a presentation that was made by staff to the board members. And you can see they're focused on ozone attainment. There are EPA requirements for national ambient air quality standards. The next goal is 2023, beyond that 2030. And California is predicting that they are not going to hit their target unless something changes. And you can see based on current programs, they would see in 2023 things actually turning up, the decrease not continuing that has been the trend so far. If California does a program by themselves, they see some reduction, but they really believe that in order to attain, to get as close as they need to be to their goal, they really need a federal program. 60 to 70% of all the vehicle miles traveled, 60 to 70% of the fuel being burned, the emissions being created, come from vehicles that are registered outside of California. So they say they need a federal program. Unfortunately for them, with the current administration, EPA is not moving on a federal program. So California is going to go on their own. So that puts us into, as Tim said yesterday, a 45 and 5 kind of situation, where 45 states follow the current standard, and California and those that have adopted their rules start down the path of a unique regulation. Now that does nothing but complicate all of our lives out there, so we're hoping that at some point EPA comes off the bench and becomes an active player in this, and we can get something that really is a national focus. The basic concepts for ultra-low NOx are these: heat up the after-treatment system faster and keep it warm longer. Now, the key in the test cycles that, as we've done work, ARB's done work, a lot of work at Southwest Research Institute that many of you will be touring this afternoon, found that the after-treatment system today heats up and starts dosing at about 500 seconds into the test cycle. In order to hit what California is looking at, we need to be more like at 200 seconds. So for you in the room, that means dose earlier, which means more dosing, more DEF being used. And then in traffic, you have to keep the after-treatment system heated up for a longer period of time. Keep that dosing going even at low speeds and light loads. There are many, many technologies out there that can be used in combinations to create this future. Not all of them work early, not all of them keep the system warm longer. Some work well in combination, but we're in the phase right now of exploration and elimination. Look at all the technologies, look at the combinations, see how they perform, look at their cost, look at their robustness, look at how they package on the vehicle. Can we meet a customer's needs for durability and reliability? Those that don't, take them off the list of potentials. Because there are so many different ones, I see a future that potentially has multiple solutions. Many OEMs may go this way and some may go that. Some tried that with 2010 and weren't successful, but in this, both paths are viable. Multiple paths available to us. So the steps forward is we need to work on a regulation. We need to get the rules put in place, and we need to work with the agencies to develop a stringency level that not only we can meet, but hits the environmental needs as well. Then the question becomes, how do we deal with compliance? What is compliance? Is it just in a test cell, or are we dealing with emissions out on the road? And certainly as a part of it, we must take into account the impact on our customers. As I said earlier, if we get the equation right for the customer, all of this becomes very easy. What we don't want is to miss the customer and end up in a situation like we did in 2007 and to some extent in 2010, where we ended up with a huge pre-buy, particularly in 2006, where built everything we could, squeezed everything in that we could, and then we sat on our hands for 2 years waiting for customers to come back and order again. We don't want that. The agency doesn't want that. It doesn't help the environment. It doesn't help the economy. There are many needs that our customers have for performance, for cost, for reliability, and time on the road, as well as the space that we have to create for them. So the technologies need to work for our customers as well as for the environment. Some of the keys there that we have to consider is how do they drive the vehicle? We talk about warm up and keeping warm, so duty cycle becomes very important. The temperature of the environment, the temperature of the aftertreatment are key parts of our design equation. And then where is the vehicle? Is it operating in California? Is it operating in a non-attainment zone such as South Coast? Or is it running 80 miles an hour across flatlands in Texas? Makes a difference in terms of system designs. One of the things we talked about is compliance. In today's world, compliance is all done in a test cell. It's the engine by itself running 2 separate test cycles. But in the future, as the engine becomes more integrated, maybe we go to a powertrain test. Maybe we start taking into account the vehicle-level technologies, such as stop-start technologies and hybrids that allow us to take credit for the technologies that reduce emissions beyond just what the engine is doing. Today, we have an in-use compliance aspect to the heavy-duty marketplace, something the PACCAR world and the Europeans are learning more about. But we have to do testing of vehicles in use on the road exactly as customers drive it. Does that become more demanding? Do we have to do more of that in the future? Or do we go to the ultimate, where we get real-time data on every truck, every vehicle running every mile, and all that comes back to the OEMs that we summarize and then report to the agency? In that world, we become responsible for every vehicle for a long time, not just the engine as it leaves our factory. That changes the equation out there as well. I said what we're hoping for is a nationwide program. Having 4, 5, 6, 7 states that are on one standard and the rest on another, it wreaks havoc and confusion for our customers in the marketplace. We believe that all are better served, as well as the environment, using a nationwide regulation. And stepping back a little bit, taking a bigger picture view for the future, at a global level, we heard yesterday that Mexico is moving forward with new regulations that's going to bring diesel exhaust fluid into the marketplace. The Europeans, they're moving in 2019, late 2018, into a CO2 program where they have to start declaring performance of their vehicle. And I expect by 2023, 2024, they're going to be in a limit value system such as what the U.S. has with Phase 1 and Phase 2. And they are fully expecting a NOx reduction regulation coming there as well. China, with the China 6 regulation coming in, they're going to bring what they consider the best of the European and best of the North American regulations into their marketplace. Another opportunity for fluid. And India and other countries are looking at taking steps forward for themselves as well. Our history has taught us a lot. We've learned, we've progressed. And one of the things that we try and reinforce for the younger engineers especially, and remind others that history is there for us to learn from. So we keep emphasizing, reflect on the past, and then do the work necessary to protect our future. Protect the future for the environment, protect our business future, and protect our customers' future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Wow, that's really insightful presentation on what the future holds for SCR, ultra-low NOx, DEF. So very, very helpful, and we're very grateful for running us through your views. We have time for a few questions, or perhaps one or two questions. So the microphones should be somewhere available. Please raise your hand if you have any questions for Dan on what he's been talking about. Many of you are always interested to know what the OEs are thinking in terms of their future plans for emissions control, so it's a good chance to get Dan's views. I'll start with a question, Dan. You mentioned a few times early on in your presentation the EPA requirement for the DEF diesel storage on the vehicle, the 2-to-1 requirements. Can you comment on how that's changed? Is it going to change? What's the current situation? Do you still have to have that 2-to-1 tankage on the vehicle, or is that changing to 1-to-1 ratio, given that the truck stop network is so developed? There's DEF just about everywhere. Where are we?
Good question, Tim. Over time, EPA and California Air Resources Board have done field surveys where they went out and checked vehicles to find out what's the level of performance. Is everybody refilling DEF the same time they refill fuel? And fortunately, they found very good compliance level out in the marketplace, and so a couple of years ago we were able to convince them that it was time to move from a 2-to-1 requirement down to a 1-to-1. Now let's call it 1.1, 1.2 to 1. I want to make sure that there's no way that you're going to run out of DEF before you run out of fuel.
Right. So that helps the packaging and the amounts of space for diesel, I guess.
It does, and it also gives the OEMs the flexibility to increase the dosing rate without penalty. Yeah, we're used to put in enough frame space and tank size for 2-to-1. Now we can go 1-to-1 with higher dosing rates and still fulfill our customers' needs.
And what's the time frame for that change?
It actually implemented, top of my head, I want to think 2015 time frame.
Yeah. So let's have some questions from the audience. One at the back. Do we have a microphone? There was a microphone. Yep, there we go. Adam will bring it over. Please introduce yourself and your company so we can understand where you're coming from. Thanks.
Hello, I am Reddy from Cummins. I am looking at your presentation, and we are looking for the ultra-low NOx reductions. When you key on the engine, from key on time to reach the temperature up to 200 degrees centigrade, it takes about 60 to 70 seconds. So during that time, you release a lot of NOx emissions. So how can you reduce that NOx emissions? Because if you look other alternative reductant source, or DEF is possible to decompose at that low temperatures. What is your suggestion on that?
But at this point, we don't have a solution yet. That's part of our knowledge that we need to gain, developing systems. The path that the agencies are looking at out there are two. One is to put a system on that will absorb the NOx while the engine is cold.
Okay.
The other is to put a small burner on, either electrically heated grid or a diesel-fired burner to heat up the exhaust further, heat up the after-treatment system so that dosing can start earlier. So those are the kind of the two paths that I think are being looked at today for the future regulation.
Yeah, I have one other following question. I heard recently that some of the catalyst suppliers like JMI, BASF, and Umicore, so they are doing some tests using some ammonia gas like MNX type of system to saturate the catalyst first at low temperature, and then later on, once temperature reaches at 200 degrees centigrade, they inject the DEF. Is that correct?
That's one of the, as I said, one of the multiple technologies that are being investigated right now. Don't know if that's going to be the best path. You know, we're talking about moving the SCR, a small SCR catalyst up next to the turbocharger to go close coupled, putting SCR coatings on the face of the DPF. Just a wide variety of different technology paths. You know, in a year we'll know more. In 2 years we'll know a little more. But you know, we're looking, as Tim indicated yesterday, at probably a 7-year window before a regulation possibly could implement. So 2024. If you ask industry, we'd prefer 2027, 2030. You know, give us time to make sure that we get the right technology developed and get it in a reliable configuration.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Any more questions for Dan? I had a question, and this might not be even something you can answer, but in the chart that you showed from California Air Resource Board with the trend of NOx or ozone in the over time, there was a very sharp change in the trend in 2023, where after a series of years of drops, suddenly started increasing. What happens in 2023 that makes that the situation? It seems like quite a sharp change.
It is a sharp change. And in California, they have a regulation that all commercial vehicles need to move to 2010 emissions technology by January 1st, 2023.
I see.
So they're taking old vehicles off the road. You know, everything has to be 2007 technology or equivalent today. So in 2023, they finish eliminating all the old vehicles, those that aren't on SCR, and then essentially everything starts to grow because the vehicle miles traveled continues to grow.
I see. So they need something new to happen after 2023. That's
Yes.
the ultra-low NOx requirements. Right.
Yes.
Gotcha. So that probably determines the ideal timing for carbs. If they did something on ultra-low NOx, it would probably be from 2023 then.
That's what they would like.
Yeah.
From our standpoint, we've got another regulation that has greenhouse gas has a step in 2024.
Yeah.
And doing 2 engine programs, major engine programs on different technologies separated by year doesn't make sense.
Yeah, okay.
Can't support that. So we want it all brought together. So, you know, the earliest that we would push for is 2024.
Gotcha. Right. Any final questions before we move on for Dan? No, in that case, again, thanks very much, Dan. Really useful presentation.
Thank you.